How could a young Pharaoh, Thutmose III, dare to gamble the fate of an empire on one bold decision? How could more than 300 Canaanite princes gather a force of 30,000 men, yet still fail to unite? How could 20,000 disciplined Egyptians with bronze weapons and chariots face a larger, desperate enemy and turn the tide of history? This is the story of Megiddo, the first battle ever recorded in human history. The year was 1457 BC. The world's first recorded battle was about to be fought, not for land alone, but for the fate of empires. For decades, Egypt had ruled the land of Canaan. Pharaohs demanded tribute, gold, grain, horses, and obedience from more than 300 city-states. To Egypt, Canaan was not just territory, it was the bridge to Mesopotamia, the artery of trade, and the proof of Egypt's power beyond the Nile. But to the princes of Canaan, it was humiliation. They were kings in name, but vassals in truth. Pride turned to anger. Anger turned to rebellion. And at the heart of this revolt stood the king of Kadesh, a man bold enough to unite the city-states and declare war on Pharaoh himself. The reasons for war were as sharp as any blade. If Egypt lost Canaan, it would lose its wealth, its prestige, and its security. To the Canaanite alliance, this was the one chance: to strike while Pharaoh Thutmose III was still young, to break free before Egypt's grip tightened again. The armies revealed a staggering contrast. Thutmose III marched with 20,000 soldiers, archers, spearmen, and the pride of Egypt. Hundreds of war chariots, swift and deadly, bronze wheels flashing in the sun. His men drilled in formation, armored with bronze, disciplined by centuries of imperial tradition. This was the machine of empire. The Canaanite coalition was larger in number, perhaps over 30,000 warriors, mustered from hundreds of city-states. Their strength lay in numbers, in their fierce knowledge of local hills and valleys, and in desperation for freedom. But their weapons were uneven. Many bore simple spears and leather shields. Few had bronze armor, and their unity was fragile. What they had in size, they lacked in cohesion. What they had in courage, they lacked in discipline. The leaders themselves mirrored their armies. Pharaoh Thutmose III, young, daring, brilliant in vision, yet untested in command. The king of Kadesh, seasoned, ambitious, but blinded by pride, unable to bind his allies with the iron grip of unity. Thus the storm gathered. Egypt marched to preserve its empire. Canaan rose to win its freedom. And between them stood a city that would give its name to the world's first written battle, Megiddo. The march to Megiddo began with a choice. 3 roads cut through the hills of Carmel, each leading to the valley where the Canaanite army waited. The first was wide and safe, curving far around the mountains. It would take time, but the army would arrive intact. The second was a longer detour, equally secure. The third, the road through Aruna, was narrow, steep, and dangerous. A pass so tight that soldiers would have to march in single file. If the enemy lay in wait, the Egyptian army could be destroyed before it even reached the battlefield. Thutmose III gathered his generals. The council urged caution. "Take the safe road," they begged. "Why risk the empire in a canyon of death?" Their voices carried the weight of reason, but Pharaoh heard something else. Hesitation, fear, the kind of thinking that loses empires. He rose and declared, "We march through Aruna. For if we take the long roads, the enemy will be ready. If we take the narrow pass, we will take them by surprise. Victory belongs not to the cautious, but to the bold." And so the gamble was made. For 2 days, the Egyptian army filed through the treacherous mountain pass. 20,000 men, chariots, supplies, all stretched in a vulnerable line. Every moment, they risked annihilation. But the Canaanites, led by the king of Kadesh, had assumed Pharaoh would choose safety. Arrogant and overconfident, they left the Aruna pass unguarded. When the Egyptian vanguard emerged from the mountains, the valley lay open before them. The Canaanites were caught off guard. Their armies were scattered, their camps still unprepared. The brilliant gamble had worked. Here was the difference in leadership. Thutmose III, young, daring, willing to risk everything for surprise. The king of Kadesh, proud, overconfident, blinded by the belief that numbers alone would grant him victory. One trusted in bold strategy, the other trusted in sheer arrogance. The trap had been reversed. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Battle of Megiddo was about to begin. The valley of Megiddo trembled. From the Egyptian lines came the thunder of hooves. War chariots surged forward, bronze wheels flashing, horses armored in gleaming harness. Dust rose in towering clouds, the ground itself quaking beneath their charge. Archers stood on the chariots, loosing arrows in sheets, darkening the sky as the first storm of Pharaoh's fury descended upon the Canaanite host. The coalition tried to answer. Thousands of Canaanite warriors poured out from their camps, spears glinting, shields lifted high. They roared their defiance, a sea of men stretching across the valley floor. For a moment, the numbers seemed overwhelming. They outshouted the Egyptians, their war cries shaking the air. But then impact came. The Egyptian chariots crashed into the Canaanite lines like waves of steel against sand. Horses trampled shields, bronze blades slashed through leather armor, and the disciplined wedge formations of Egypt ripped holes through the sprawling, unorganized masses. Every time the Canaanites tried to close ranks, the next wave of chariots smashed them apart. From behind, Egyptian infantry advanced in step, ranks of spearmen and archers pressing forward, driving the broken enemy back toward Megiddo's walls. The clash was deafening. The grind of wood and iron, the scream of men cut down, the pounding rhythm of drums urging the Egyptians to push harder, faster. Pharaoh Thutmose III rode at the front, his chariot a beacon of gold and power, rallying his men with every stroke of his bow. His presence was thunder itself, filling his soldiers with unshakable courage. The king of Kadesh, desperate, tried to rally his coalition. He rode among his allies, urging them to stand, to hold. But jealousy and fear split their unity. Each prince fought for his own honor, not for a common cause. The Canaanite line bent, then cracked, then broke. As the sun blazed overhead, the valley became a furnace of dust, fire, and blood. The Egyptians surged forward, unstoppable, and the Canaanite army, so vast and proud at dawn, now shattered, streaming back in chaos, fleeing for the safety of Megiddo's walls. The battle was not yet over, but its outcome had been written in thunder and bronze. The battlefield had been won, but the war was not over. The Canaanite army, broken and bleeding, fled behind the towering walls of Megiddo. They dragged their wounded, abandoned their chariots, and sealed the gates with desperation. From the ramparts, banners of countless city-states fluttered, a final defiance against Pharaoh. Thutmose III rode through the smoking valley, surveying the wreckage. His generals urged an immediate assault, to storm the gates, to crush the enemy in one final blow. But the Pharaoh was not reckless. He had seen too many die in the fury of battle. To throw his men against those high stone walls would cost lives he could not afford to waste. Instead, he gave a different command. Build a wall around the city. No one enters. No one leaves. We will starve them into submission. And so the siege of Megiddo began. Day by day, the Egyptians built a ring of fortifications around the fortress city. Trenches, barricades, watchtowers. The noose tightened with every sunrise. Canaanite warriors attempted daring raids at night, slipping out through hidden gates, but they were hunted down and driven back with arrows and spears. Supplies dwindled, hunger grew. The proud coalition, once tens of thousands strong, now huddled within their stone prison, their spirits slowly breaking. For 7 long months, the siege dragged on. The valley was silent except for the cries of the starving within the walls and the watchful drums of the Egyptians outside. Seasons changed, but Pharaoh's army held firm. Patience, discipline, and iron were turned into the sharpest weapons of all. At last, the gates of Megiddo creaked open. One by one, the princes of Canaan emerged, stripped of pride, crawling on their knees, their foreheads pressed to the ground before Pharaoh. They offered their sons, their gold, their weapons, anything to save their lives. The king of Kadesh himself bowed low, his defiance broken. The great rebellion of Canaan had come to nothing. Pharaoh Thutmose III had triumphed not just with the sword, but with unyielding resolve. The name of Megiddo would forever be carved into history, the city that witnessed the world's first written battle, the stage of Egypt's greatest gamble, and the symbol of Pharaoh's unstoppable will. The gates of Megiddo had fallen silent, and Egypt's banners now flew above the valley. The rebellion that once threatened the empire had ended in chains. The spoils of victory poured before Pharaoh's feet. Lists carved on temple walls tell the tale. Thousands of horses and chariots, hundreds of suits of bronze armor, mountains of gold, silver, and precious stones. Captives marched in endless lines, princes of Canaan bound and humbled, their once proud heads pressed low to the earth. What had begun as a coalition of kings ended as a parade of prisoners. Thutmose III rode through the valley in his golden chariot, the sun glinting on his armor. Around him, his soldiers lifted their voices, chanting his name. He was no longer just a young king seeking to prove himself. He had become the conqueror of Canaan, the master of the Near East. But the triumph was more than material. Egypt's borders were secure, its rivals broken, its wealth overflowing. Yet what mattered most was the message carved into the minds of nations. Egypt could not be defied. Its armies could march through mountains, its pharaoh could gamble the fate of thousands, and win. For Thutmose III, this victory was the beginning of something greater. From Megiddo, he launched campaigns deeper into Syria and beyond, extending Egypt's reach farther than ever before. Historians would one day call him the Napoleon of Egypt. But in his own time, he was something more. A living god, the embodiment of power on earth. The valley that once shook with battle now echoed with hymns of triumph. Drums thundered, trumpets blared, incense burned. Egypt had not only crushed its enemies, it had proclaimed to the world that the Nile's empire stood supreme, unbroken and eternal. The dust of battle settled, but the memory of Megiddo would never fade. This was more than a victory. It was the first battle in human history to be recorded in writing. On the walls of Karnak Temple, scribes carved the story, the march, the gamble, the clash, the siege, and the triumph. They listed the spoils, named the cities, and immortalized the courage of Pharaoh. For the first time, war was no longer just an echo of voices or a tale passed from father to son. It was history inscribed in stone. The lessons of Megiddo reached far beyond the valley. It showed that numbers alone could not guarantee victory, that arrogance could break the strongest coalition, and that boldness and strategy could overcome overwhelming odds. Pharaoh Thutmose III had not simply won a battle, he had defined the art of command for generations to come. For Egypt, the triumph at Megiddo opened a golden age. Its borders stretched farther than ever before. Its influence reached into Syria, Mesopotamia, and beyond. The Nile became not just the cradle of civilization, but the throne of empire. And for the world, Megiddo became a name of power. Millennia later, in distant tongues, it would echo as Armageddon, a symbol of the final, decisive battle. What began in 1457 BC as Pharaoh's gamble would grow into a legend that touched prophecy itself. The valley still lies silent today, its fields green, its hills unchanged. But beneath that quiet earth lies memory of chariots thundering, of kings kneeling, of a young pharaoh who risked everything and claimed eternity. Megiddo was not just the first battle written in history, it was the moment history itself learned how to remember.